The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Elena Sutherland stepped down onto the wooden planks of Sierra Vista, Arizona, her hands trembling despite the suffocating heat of the July afternoon in 1878. She carried only one small carpet bag and wore a dress that had once been fine, but now bore the wrinkles and stains of a journey that had taken her far from everything she had ever known, far from the screaming and the shattered glass and the man who had sworn he loved her even as his fists proved otherwise. The main street of Sierra Vista stretched before her like a promise she wasn't sure she could trust, lined with weathered buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat rising from the hard, packed earth. A saloon stood on one corner, its piano music drifting through the swinging doors. Across the way, a general store displayed bolts of fabric in its dusty window. Further down, she could see a boarding house with a hand-painted sign that read, "Mrs. Patterson's Rooms for Rent." Elena's ribs still ached where Thomas had kicked her 3 weeks ago, though the bruises had faded to a sickly yellow-green that her dress concealed. Her left wrist bore a thin scar from when he had grabbed her and twisted, until something gave way with a snap that still echoed in her nightmares. But those were the wounds anyone might see if they looked close enough. The ones that really mattered, the ones that woke her gasping in the night, those lived somewhere deeper, in the place where her trust had once resided, in the hollow where hope used to bloom. She had $23 to her name, the clothes on her back, and a desperate need to disappear into a place where Thomas could never find her. New York seemed a world away now, and she prayed it was far enough. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and careful, the kind of voice that didn't want to startle. "Can I help you find something?" Elena turned slowly, her body tensing instinctively, ready to run or defend herself or do whatever it took to survive. But the man standing a respectful distance away didn't move toward her. He simply stood there, hat in his hands, dark hair falling across his forehead, watching her with eyes the color of creek water under a summer sky. He was tall, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with broad shoulders and work-hardened hands that held his hat gently, as if it were something precious. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his trousers, and a bandana hung loosely around his neck. A gun belt sat at his hips, but his hand stayed well away from it. "I'm looking for the boarding house," Elena said, hating how her voice wavered. She straightened her spine, forcing strength into her words. "Mrs. Patterson's." "That's 3 buildings down on your left," he said, nodding in that direction. "Mrs. Patterson's a good woman, fair with her prices, and she doesn't tolerate any trouble from her boarders." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You planning on staying in Sierra Vista long?" "I don't know yet." Elena clutched her carpet bag tighter. "I'm looking for work." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that made him look younger. "There's always work for folks willing to do it. Mrs. Patterson might know of something. And the general store owner, Mr. Hutchins, sometimes needs help with inventory and such." He settled his hat back on his head. "Name's Kane Quincy. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside town. If you need anything or run into any trouble, most folks around here know where to find me." "Thank you, Mr. Quincy." Elena took a step toward the boarding house, then hesitated. Good manners had been drilled into her since childhood, even if everything else had been beaten out. "I'm Elena Sutherland. Welcome to Sierra Vista, Miss Sutherland." Kane touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed more courtesy than habit. "I hope you find what you're looking for here." Elena walked away before he could see the tears that suddenly burned in her eyes. She wasn't looking for anything except a place where the past couldn't reach her, but she didn't expect this cowboy to understand that. Nobody could understand what it felt like to run from your own life, to shed your identity like a snake sheds its skin, hoping the new version of yourself might somehow be stronger, braver, less broken. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and capable hands that had clearly seen their share of hard work. She looked Elena up and down when she entered the boarding house, taking in the expensive fabric of her dress despite its current condition, the quality of her shoes, the way Elena held herself with a strange mixture of dignity and fear. $2 a week for a room, Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. That includes breakfast and supper. You pay for your own lunch, but there's a kitchen you can use if you're careful with it. No men in the rooms, no loud noise after 9 o'clock, and you keep your space clean. Laundry day is Monday, and we all pitch in. You got a problem with any of that? No, madam. Elena reached into her bag for the money, grateful that she had enough for at least 10 weeks if she was careful. I'm also looking for work. Do you know of anyone in town who might be hiring, Mrs. Patterson counted the bills Elena handed her, then tucked them into her apron pocket. Mr. Hutchins at the general store mentioned needing help. His wife just had their 5th baby, and she can't manage the store and the children both. You know anything about keeping accounts or managing inventory? Yes, madam. My father owned a dry goods store back in. Elena caught herself. Back east, I helped him with the books for years. Good. You go see him tomorrow morning. Tell him I sent you. Mrs. Patterson pulled a key from a hook on the wall behind her small desk. You're in room 4, top of the stairs and to the right. Supper's at 6. Don't be late or you'll miss it. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the dusty street. Elena set her carpetbag on the bed and sat down beside it, the sudden quiet overwhelming after weeks of constant motion and fear. She had done it. She had actually escaped, had traveled more than 2,000 miles, had found a place where nobody knew her name or her shame, or the fact that she had been stupid enough to marry a monster because he had smiled at her in church and told her she was beautiful. The tears came then, hot and bitter, and she pressed her face into her hands to muffle the sound. She cried for the girl she had been before Thomas, for the dreams that had died under his fists, for the family she had left behind without explanation, because she couldn't bear to see the disappointment in their eyes. Most of all, she cried for the trust she had lost, the part of herself that had believed in love and goodness and the promises people made under God's watching eyes. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin of water on the washstand and changed into her other dress, the simpler one that didn't draw as much attention. She braided her long blonde hair and pinned it in a coil at the base of her neck, then studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her had shadows under her green eyes and a wariness that aged her beyond her 22 years, but she was still standing. That had to count for something. Supper at Mrs. Patterson's long dining table was a quiet affair. There were 4 other boarders. An elderly man named Mr. Grayson who worked as a clerk at the land office, 2 minors who spent more time talking to each other than anyone else, and a middle-aged woman named Miss Olivia who taught at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town. They all nodded politely to Elena, but didn't press her with questions, for which she was grateful. The food was simple but plentiful. Beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread that Mrs. Patterson served with an efficiency that suggested she had been feeding boarders for many years. Elena ate slowly, savoring each bite, remembering the nights she had gone without supper because Thomas had been angry about something she had supposedly done wrong, some imagined slight that justified his cruelty. "You're the new arrival I saw this afternoon," Miss Olivia said, passing Elena the butter. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be looking for work." "Yes, madam. She suggested I speak with Mr. Hutchins at the general store. He's a good man, and his wife Martha is one of the kindest souls you'll ever meet. They could use the help." Miss Olivia smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes. "How are you finding Sierra Vista so far?" "It seems like a nice town," Elena said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much, not wanting to invite the questions that might come if she seemed too eager or too desperate. "Quiet. It has its moments of excitement, but mostly yes, it's quiet. That's what most folks who come here are looking for." Miss Olivia's gaze held a knowing quality that made Elena wonder what the schoolteacher saw when she looked at her. A place to start fresh, away from whatever they left behind. Elena focused on her stew, unwilling to confirm or deny, and Miss Olivia had the grace to let the subject drop. After supper, Elena returned to her room and stood at the window, watching the last of the daylight fade from the sky. The street below was emptying as shopkeepers closed their doors and families settled in for the evening. In the distance, she could see the dark silhouettes of mountains against the deepening blue, and somewhere out there was the Double R Ranch where Kane Quincy lived and worked. She didn't know why she thought of him, the cowboy with the careful voice and respectful distance. Maybe it was because he had been the first person to speak to her in this new life. Or maybe it was because something in his eyes had suggested he understood about running from things, even if he didn't know the specifics of her story. Whatever the reason, she found herself hoping she might see him again, even as another part of her recoiled at the thought of trusting any man ever again. The next morning, Elena presented herself at Hutchins' General Store at precisely 8 o'clock, wearing her better dress and with her hair neatly arranged. The store was a treasure trove of everything a frontier town might need. Bolts of fabric stacked against one wall, tools hanging from pegs, barrels of flour and sugar, jars of penny candy, saddles and tack, patent medicines, and 100 other items crowding the shelves and floor space. Mr. Hutchins was a thin man with spectacles and a harried expression that brightened when Elena introduced herself. "Mrs. Patterson sent you. Thank the Lord. I've been trying to manage the store and help Martha with the baby, and I'm about at my wit's end. Can you start today?" "Yes, sir." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, relief flooding through her. Work meant money, and money meant she could stay, could build a new life, could put more distance between herself and Thomas. Mr. Hutchins showed her the account books, the inventory system, the prices for various goods, and how to operate the cash register. It was familiar work, comfortable work, and Elena found herself falling into the rhythm of it as if she had never left her father's store in New York. By midday, she had already reorganized the ribbon display and corrected an error in the previous week's accounts that Mr. Hutchins had been puzzling over for days. "Miss Sutherland, you're a godsend," Mr. Hutchins said, shaking his head in wonder at the corrected books. "Would you be willing to work 6 days a week? I can pay you $3.50 a week, and you can take Sunday off for church and rest." $3.50 was more than Elena had dared hope for. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." The morning passed quickly as customers came and went, buying supplies or stopping to chat with Mr. Hutchins about the weather and the crops and the latest news from the territorial capital. Elena stayed mostly in the background, learning the rhythms of the store, memorizing where things were kept, observing how Mr. Hutchins interacted with the townspeople. It was just after noon when the door opened and Kane Quincy walked in, his spurs making a soft chiming sound against the wooden floor. He stopped when he saw Elena behind the counter, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a warm smile. Miss Sutherland. I see you found work already. Mr. Quincy. Elena felt her cheeks warm, annoyed at herself for the reaction. Yes, Mr. Hutchins was kind enough to hire me. She's already indispensable, Mr. Hutchins said, emerging from the back room with a bolt of denim in his arms. What can we do for you today, Kane? Need some supplies for the ranch. Boss wants me to pick up nails, a new hammer, and some of that liniment for the horses. Kane pulled a list from his pocket and handed it to Elena rather than Mr. Hutchins, the gesture somehow feeling significant even though it probably wasn't. Elena read through the list, aware of Kane watching her as she moved around the store gathering the items. She could feel his gaze following her, but it didn't make her feel hunted or afraid the way Thomas's attention had. Instead, it felt different, careful, as if Kane was trying to figure her out without invading her space. Will there be anything else? She asked when she had assembled everything on the counter. No, madam, that should do it. Kane paid for the supplies, then hesitated. I hope you don't think this is forward of me, Miss Sutherland, but there's a church social this Saturday evening. Just a gathering with food and music. Nothing fancy. If you're not otherwise engaged, I'd be honored if you'd let me escort you. Elena's first instinct was to refuse, to throw up the walls she had built around herself and keep this man at a safe distance. But something stopped her. A small voice that whispered she couldn't hide forever, couldn't let Thomas steal every possibility of joy from her future. And Kane was standing there with such honest hope in his eyes, not demanding or assuming, just asking. I don't dance, she heard herself say, immediately regretting the words because they revealed too much, implied too many things she didn't want to explain. That's all right. I'm not much of a dancer myself. Kane's smile widened. But I'm real good at standing around eating pie and talking to pretty ladies, if you're amenable to that. Despite everything, despite all the reasons she had to say no, Elena felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. All right, Mr. Quincy. I'll go to the church social with you. Please, call me Kane. Mr. Quincy makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting in a bank somewhere. He gathered up his supplies. I'll pick you up at Mrs. Patterson's around 6 on Saturday if that suits you. That suits me fine. Elena watched him leave, then realized Mr. Hutchins was watching her with an amused expression. Kane Quincy's a good man, the store owner said. One of the best. Works hard, treats everyone fair, never causes trouble. His family has been ranching in these parts for near about 20 years. I'm sure he's very respectable, Elena said, feeling her cheeks heat again. It's just a church social. Of course it is. Mr. Hutchins didn't bother hiding his smile. Now, let me show you how we handle the feed orders. Ranchers come in and sometimes need large quantities, and we have a system for that. The rest of the week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Elena learned the intricacies of running the general store, memorized the names and faces of regular customers, and slowly began to feel like she might actually have a place in Sierra Vista. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house became familiar, the routine of meals and quiet evenings providing a structure that felt safe. Miss Olivia, the schoolteacher, took to sitting with Elena after supper, sharing stories about the town and its residents without ever pressing Elena to share her own past. But the nights were harder. Alone in her small room, Elena would lie awake listening to the sounds of the town settling down, and her mind would inevitably drift back to Thomas. She would remember the first time he had hit her, 3 months after their wedding, when she had served dinner 5 minutes late because she had been helping a neighbor. The shock of it had been almost worse than the pain. The way he had looked at her afterward with cold eyes and told her it was her fault for not being more careful with his time. It had gotten worse from there, slowly and then rapidly, until Elena lived in a constant state of fear, never knowing what might set him off, walking on eggshells that shattered under her feet no matter how careful she was. He had isolated her from her friends, from her family, telling them she was too sick to receive visitors, too tired to attend church, too busy with household duties to go out. By the time she realized she was trapped, the walls had already closed in completely. The night she finally ran, Thomas had come home drunk and angrier than usual. He had accused her of flirting with the butcher's assistant, a boy of maybe 16, who had helped carry her packages to the door. Thomas had grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall, and something in Elena had finally broken free of the fear. When he passed out on the floor, she had taken what little money she could find, packed her smallest bag, and walked out into the night without looking back. She had spent the last of her reserves on the stagecoach ticket, choosing the farthest destination she could afford, praying that Arizona territory would be far enough to keep her safe. Now, lying in her narrow bed in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, she sometimes wondered if anywhere would ever be far enough, if Thomas would come looking for her, if she would spend the rest of her life jumping at shadows and flinching from raised voices. Saturday arrived with a clarity of sky that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Elena spent the day at the store, trying not to think about the evening ahead, trying not to second-guess her decision to accept Kane's invitation. By the time she returned to the boarding house to change for the church social, her nerves were stretched taut. "You look lovely," Miss Olivia said when Elena came downstairs in her better dress, the deep blue one that brought out the color of her eyes. "Kane Quincy won't know what hit him." "It's just a church social," Elena protested, but she had taken extra care with her appearance, arranging her hair in a softer style and pinching her cheeks for color. "Of course it is." Miss Olivia's knowing smile was becoming familiar. Kane arrived precisely at 6, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt and vest that made him look less like a ranch hand and more like the kind of man who might court a respectable woman. He offered Elena his arm with a shy smile, and they walked the 3 blocks to the church together as the evening air began to cool. The churchyard was filled with people, families and couples and groups of friends gathered around tables laden with food. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow as the sun sank toward the horizon. Someone was playing a fiddle, and children ran between the adults, their laughter bright and clear. Elena felt her chest tighten as she took it all in. This was the kind of life she had dreamed of once before Thomas, the kind of simple joy she had thought marriage would bring. For a moment, the loss of it overwhelmed her, and she had to blink back tears. "You all right?" Kane's voice was soft, concerned. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, the touch gentle and brief. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just been a while since I've been to something like this." Kane didn't press for details, just led her to the food tables and began introducing her to people. Everyone was friendly in that cautious way of small towns, welcoming but curious, trying to figure out where she fit in their established social order. Elena smiled and nodded and answered questions as vaguely as possible, grateful when Kane steered conversations away from her past and toward safer topics. They filled plates with fried chicken, potato salad, biscuits, and an array of desserts that made Elena's mouth water. Kane found them a spot under a cottonwood tree, far enough from the main crowd to have some privacy, but close enough to be properly chaperoned by the presence of others. "This is nice," Elena said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The food was good, the evening air pleasant, and Kane's company was easy in a way she hadn't expected. Sierra Vista knows how to throw a decent social. Kane bit into a piece of chicken, We don't get much excitement out here, so when we do have a gathering, folks go all out. How long have you been working at the Double R Ranch? About 5 years now. I came out here when I was 20, looking for work and adventure. Found plenty of both. Kane smiled, the expression lighting up his face. The ranch owner, Mr. Reynolds, he's a fair man, tough but fair. He's taught me everything about ranching, and he's promised me a piece of land of my own someday if I stick with it. That's kind of him. He believes in rewarding loyalty and hard work, says a good ranch hand is worth his weight in gold out here. Kane paused, studying Elena with those creek water eyes. What about you? What brings you all the way to Arizona territory? Elena had known the question would come eventually, but she still wasn't prepared for it. Her fingers tightened on her fork. I needed a change, a fresh start. Running from something or running to something. The directness of it caught her off guard. Most people would have accepted her vague answer and moved on, but Kane was watching her with an expression that suggested he already knew part of the answer and was giving her a chance to be honest. Both, she said finally. Maybe neither. I don't know any more. Kane nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. I came out here running from my father's expectations. He wanted me to be a banker like him, to wear a suit and count other people's money and never get my hands dirty. But I wanted to work outside, to build something with my own hands, to be someone other than old James Quincy's disappointing son. I don't think you're disappointing. The words slipped out before Elena could stop them. Thank you for that. Kane's smile was warm. Point is, I understand about needing to be somewhere else, to be someone new. Half the folks in Sierra Vista are here for the same reason. We don't judge. Elena felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the armor she had built. The truth is, I was married, briefly. It didn't work out and I left. That's all I want to say about it right now. That's all you need to say. Kane reached over and gently touched her hand, just a brief press of his fingers against hers. Whatever happened before, it's done. Out here, you're just Elena Sutherland who works at Hutchins' General Store and makes the account books balance like magic. That's enough. Tears burned in Elena's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. How could this cowboy, this man she barely knew, offer her the acceptance she hadn't even dared hope for? Thank you, she whispered. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Then Kane got them both slices of apple pie that tasted like heaven. The fiddle music picked up, and couples began to dance in the cleared space near the church steps. Elena watched them spin and laugh, feeling a pang of longing for something she had never really had. I know you said you don't dance, Kane said, but would you take a walk with me? There's a nice path that runs along the creek just behind the church. Elena hesitated, fear and desire warring inside her. The path would be darker, more private, away from the safety of the crowd. But Kane was watching her with such patient hopefulness, and she was tired of being afraid. All right, a short walk. They left their plates on the table and walked through the churchyard, nodding to people as they passed. The path Kane led her to was well worn, winding through a stand of cottonwoods toward the sound of running water. The lantern light from the social still reached them here, enough to see by but not enough to be truly exposed. The creek was shallow and clear, running over smooth stones and creating a peaceful burbling sound. Elena stood on the bank, breathing in the cool air rising from the water, feeling some of the tension drain from her shoulders. This is where I come when I need to think, Kane said, standing beside her but not too close. Something about moving water just settles the mind. It's beautiful. Elena. Kane's voice made her turn to look at him. I want you to know something. I'm not a man who plays games or says things I don't mean. When I invited you tonight, it was because I wanted to spend time with you, wanted to get to know you better. Not because I'm looking for a quick flirtation or because I think you're easy prey, or any of the other ugly reasons some men have." Elena's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because when you look at me sometimes, I see fear in your eyes. And I want you to know that you don't need to be afraid of me. Not ever." Kane took a slow breath. "I don't know what happened in your past, and you don't have to tell me unless you want to, but I can see it left marks on you, the kind that don't show on the outside. And I just want you to know that I see them, and I'm not scared off by them." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, stealing her breath. He saw them. He saw the scars she tried so hard to hide, the damage she carried in her soul, and he wasn't running away. The tears she had been holding back all evening finally spilled over, and she pressed her hands to her face, horrified at her loss of control. Kane didn't move toward her, didn't try to touch her or comfort her physically. He just stood there, a solid presence in the darkness, and let her cry. When the worst of it passed, he offered her a clean handkerchief from his pocket, still keeping his distance. "I'm sorry," Elena managed, dabbing at her eyes. "I don't usually fall apart like this. Don't apologize. I think you've probably been holding that in for a while." "My husband," Elena heard herself say, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "He hurt me. Not just once or twice, but all the time for months. He made me feel like I was nothing, like I deserved everything he did to me. And the worst part is that for the longest time I believed him. I thought it was my fault, that if I could just be better, more careful, more perfect, he would stop. It wasn't your fault." Kane's voice was fierce, angry in a way that should have scared her but somehow didn't. "Whatever he did to you, whatever he told you, it was never your fault. You hear me?" Elena nodded, clutching his handkerchief. "I know that now, or at least I'm trying to know it, but knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart are two different things. They are, and it takes time to bridge that gap. But you will, Elena. I can see how strong you are, even if you don't see it yourself yet." They stood by the creek for a long time, not talking, just being. Elena felt like she had shed a skin, like some of the poison that had been festering inside her had finally drained away. It didn't fix everything, didn't heal all the wounds, but it was a start. When they finally walked back to the church social, Kane offered his arm again, and Elena took it without hesitation. The evening ended with Kane walking her back to Mrs. Patterson's, where they stood on the porch in the lamplight and smiled at each other like conspirators sharing a secret. "Can I see you again?" Kane asked. "Maybe next Sunday after church. We could take a ride out to the ranch. I'd like to show you where I work, and Mr. Reynolds makes his wife invite me to Sunday dinner regular, so there would be plenty of chaperones if you're worried about propriety." "I'd like that," Elena said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Kane touched the brim of his hat, that gesture she was coming to recognize as his signature, and walked away whistling softly. Elena stood on the porch watching him go, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. It might have been hope, though she wasn't quite ready to name it yet. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt like the beginning of a life Elena had always wanted but never thought she would have. She worked 6 days a week at the general store, learning the business and earning Mr. Hutchins's growing trust. Her account-keeping skills proved invaluable, and she began suggesting ways to organize the stock and track inventory that made the store run more smoothly. On Sundays, after attending the small church service with Mrs. Patterson and the other boarders, Elena would meet Kane. They went on careful, properly chaperoned outings. Kane took her to the Double R Ranch, where she met Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds and their 3 children. Mrs. Reynolds was a warm, practical woman who took one look at Elena and seemed to understand everything that wasn't being said, offering friendship without prying. Kane showed Elena the horses he helped train, the cattle that ranged across the vast acreage, the bunkhouse where he lived with the other ranch hands. He introduced her to his friends, men with weathered faces and kind eyes who treated her with respect, and ribbed Kane mercilessly about finally finding a girl pretty enough to tolerate him. They went on picnics to spots Kane knew, places where the desert bloomed with unexpected beauty, and the rocks formed natural shelters from the sun. They talked about everything and nothing, about Kane's dreams of owning his own ranch someday and Elena's love of books and mathematics. She told him about growing up in New York, about her parents and siblings, carefully editing out the parts that included Thomas. Kane, for his part, shared stories about learning to rope cattle and break horses, about the first time he had spent a night under the stars and realized this was the life he wanted. He talked about his mother, who had died when he was 15, and how her loss had made his father retreat into work and expectations that Kane could never meet. Slowly, carefully, Elena felt herself beginning to trust. Not fully, not without reservation, but enough to look forward to seeing Kane, enough to smile when he appeared at the store on errands and to let him take her hand when they walked. She was still wary of sudden movements, still flinched at loud noises, still woke from nightmares sweating and gasping. But the good days began to outnumber the bad ones. 2 months after Elena arrived in Sierra Vista, Kane appeared at the general store on a Wednesday afternoon with a serious expression that made her heart skip with automatic fear. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong." Kane glanced around at the other customers, then lowered his voice. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can you take a break?" Elena looked to Mr. Hutchins, who waved her away. "Go on. It's slow enough right now." They walked outside into the blazing August heat and found a bench in the shade of the store's awning. Kane removed his hat and turned it in his hands, clearly gathering his thoughts. "Elena, I know we haven't been courting long," he began. "And I know you've got reasons to be cautious about men and about trusting anyone, but I need you to know something." Elena's heart hammered. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." Kane looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Maybe I have been since the day I met you on that dusty street. I love how strong you are, how smart, how you light up when you talk about something that interests you. I love the way you help Mrs. Hutchins with her baby when you stop by after work, and how you always have a kind word for the kids who come into the store. I love your courage in starting over out here, and I love that you're willing to trust me even though I know how hard that is for you." Elena couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between them, more terrifying and more wonderful than anything she had ever heard. "I'm not asking you to say it back," Kane continued. "I'm not asking for anything except that you let me keep courting you, let me keep proving that I mean what I say. I want to build a life with you, Elena. I want to give you the kind of love you deserve, the kind that lifts you up instead of tearing you down. And I know you've got scars from your past, the kind that don't show on the outside. But I want you to know that I'll love every part of your story, even the hard parts, even the parts you think make you broken. Because you're not broken. You're just hurt, and hurt heals with time and care." The tears came again, but this time they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were the tears of someone who had been lost in the dark and suddenly saw light. "Kane, I don't know if I remember how to love someone. He took that from me, or I let him take it, and I don't know if I can ever get it back. You don't have to know right now, you just have to be willing to try." Kane reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. "Let me love you, Elena. Let me show you what it's supposed to be like. And if you never feel the same way, I'll live with that. But at least give us a chance." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, It felt safe. For the first time since Thomas, a man's touch felt safe instead of threatening. I want to try. I'm so scared, but I want to try. That's all I need. Kane let his hand drop, respecting her space even in the midst of this declaration. Now, I've got one more thing to tell you and you're not going to like it. Elena's eyes flew open. What? Mr. Reynolds is sending me to Santa Fe next week to negotiate a cattle sale. I'll be gone for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, Kane grimaced. I tried to get out of it, but he specifically asked for me and I can't say no to the boss. But I'll come back, Elena. I promise I'll come back. Relief made Elena almost laugh. I thought you were going to say something terrible. You're not upset about me leaving. Of course I'll miss you, but it's your job and I trust you to come back. The words were out before she realized how true they were. She did trust him. Somewhere in the past 2 months, Kane had proven himself over and over again, and she believed him when he said he would return. Kane's smile could have lit up the whole territory. You don't know how good it is to hear you say that. They sat together on the bench until Elena had to return to work, not talking much, just being together. When Kane finally left, Elena went back into the store feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her world. The days without Kane were harder than Elena had expected. She hadn't realized how much she had come to depend on seeing him, on his steady presence and easy smile. Work kept her busy, and Mrs. Patterson and Miss Olivia provided company in the evenings, but Elena found herself counting the days until Kane's return. On the 8th day, a man walked into the general store who made Elena's blood turn to ice. He was dressed in a fine suit despite the heat, with slicked back hair and a thin mustache. He looked around the store with an air of disdain, as if everything he saw was beneath him. When his eyes landed on Elena, they narrowed with an intensity that made her want to run. Well, well, he said, his voice cultured and cold. Elena Sutherland, or should I say Elena Montgomery, I've been looking for you for months. Elena's vision tunneled. She gripped the counter to keep from falling. Who are you? Detective William Marsh, hired by your husband to find his wayward wife. He pulled a paper from his pocket. Thomas Montgomery is very eager to have you back, Mrs. Montgomery. He's been quite worried about you. Every instinct Elena had screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Thomas had found her. After everything, after all the miles and all the desperate hoping, he had found her. I'm not going back, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter. You're a married woman, and your husband has a legal right to your presence. I have a warrant here authorizing me to escort you back to New York. Detective Marsh smiled, and it was one of the cruelest expressions Elena had ever seen. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mrs. Montgomery. Which will it be? Mr. Hutchins emerged from the back room, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. What's going on here? Private matter, Detective Marsh said smoothly. I'm here to collect Mrs. Montgomery on behalf of her husband. Miss Sutherland is an employee of mine and a valued member of this community, Mr. Hutchins said firmly. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't just come in here and harass her. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm exercising a husband's legal rights. Detective Marsh turned back to Elena. You have until tomorrow morning to gather your things. I'll be staying at the hotel, and I expect you to meet me there at 8 o'clock sharp. If you try to run again, I'll have the sheriff track you down and arrest you for theft of your husband's property. That includes the money you took when you left. He tipped his hat, a mockery of Kane's courteous gesture, and walked out of the store. Elena's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor behind the counter. Mr. Hutchins was at her side immediately, helping her to a chair in the back room. Miss Sutherland, Elena, what was that about? Are you really married? I was. I am. I don't know. Elena pressed her hands to her face. My husband, he hurt me, Mr. Hutchins. He hurt me so badly that I thought he might kill me eventually. So I ran and I came here and I thought I was safe. But he found me. Mr. Hutchins's expression hardened. You're not going anywhere with that man. I'll get the sheriff and we'll figure this out. But Elena knew there was nothing to figure out. The law was clear. A wife belonged to her husband. She had no rights, no legal standing to refuse him. If she stayed, Detective Marsh would have her arrested and she would be dragged back to New York in chains if necessary. There's nothing anyone can do, she said dully. I'm his property under the law. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're a person, not property. Mr. Hutchins paced the small back room. There has to be something we can do. When does Kane get back? The mention of Kane broke something in Elena. She had finally found someone who loved her, someone who made her feel safe, and now she was going to lose him too. Not for days. And what could he do anyway? He can't change the law. Maybe not, but Kane Quincy's not the kind of man to stand by and let something like this happen. Neither am I, for that matter. Mr. Hutchins helped Elena to her feet. You go back to Mrs. Patterson's and pack your things, but don't go to that hotel tomorrow. We'll hide you somewhere until Kane gets back, and then we'll figure out what to do. Mr. Hutchins, I can't ask you to break the law for me. You're not asking. I'm offering. Now go on before that detective comes back. Elena stumbled through the rest of the day in a haze. When she returned to the boarding house, she told Mrs. Patterson everything. The landlady listened with a grim expression, then made Elena sit down and eat dinner even though food was the last thing she wanted. You're staying here tonight, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. And if that detective comes knocking, I'll tell him you already left town. We'll hide you in the root cellar if we have to. Why are you helping me? Elena asked, bewildered by the support. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're a hard worker and a decent person, and I know the look in your eyes when you think no one's watching. That's the look of someone who's been hurt bad and is trying to heal. I'm not about to let some fancy detective drag you back to more of that. Mrs. Patterson crossed her arms. Besides, I like Kane Quincy, and he'd never forgive me if I let something happen to you while he was gone. That night, Elena lay awake in her room, listening to every creak and footstep, terrified that Detective Marsh would break down the door and take her. But the night passed quietly, and when morning came, she stayed hidden in her room while Mrs. Patterson dealt with the detective's angry visit. She left on the morning stage. Elena heard Mrs. Patterson lie smoothly. Said something about going to California. Didn't even give notice at the store, just packed up and left. You're lying, Detective Marsh snarled. Prove it. You want to search my house, you get a warrant. Until then, get off my property. Mrs. Patterson came upstairs after the detective left, looking satisfied. He bought it, I think. But we need to get you somewhere safer. He'll be watching the boarding house now. Miss Olivia, who had been listening from her room, appeared in the doorway. She can stay in the schoolhouse. There's a small room in the back where I keep supplies. No one would think to look for her there. So Elena spent the next week hiding in a schoolhouse storage room, surrounded by slates and primers and the dusty smell of chalk. Miss Olivia brought her food and news. Detective Marsh was still in town, still asking questions, but he seemed to believe Elena had fled again. He had sent a telegram to Thomas Montgomery, and now he was waiting for instructions on whether to pursue her or return to New York. Every day was an agony of waiting and fear. Elena had never felt more helpless, more trapped. She had finally found a place where she belonged, finally found someone who loved her, and it was all being ripped away. On the 10th day, Kane Quincy rode into Sierra Vista. Elena didn't know about it until Miss Olivia burst into the storage room with a grin on her face. Kane's back, Mrs. Patterson went to find him at the ranch, and she'll bring him here as soon as she can. Elena's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. She wanted to see Kane desperately, but what could he do? The law was still the law, and Detective Marsh was still in town with his warrant. An hour later, the schoolhouse door opened, and Kane strode in looking tired and dusty from travel and absolutely furious. He took one look at Elena huddled in the storage room and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Mrs. Patterson told me everything." Elena clung to him, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage and sun-warmed cotton. "There's nothing you can do. I have to go back to him, Kane. The law says I belong to him. The law is wrong." Kane pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "And I'm not letting you go without a fight. What can you possibly do? I can marry you." Elena stared at him, sure she had misheard. "What? If we get married, you'll be my wife, not his." "There has to be some way to dissolve your first marriage, to prove he's unfit or that the marriage should be annulled. But while we're figuring that out, if we're married, it'll be a lot harder for him to just take you." Kane's eyes were fierce with determination. "I know it's not the romantic proposal you deserve, and I know we haven't been courting nearly long enough. But I meant what I said before. I love you, Elena, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Kane, you could get in terrible trouble. They could arrest you for interfering in a legal marriage. Let them try." Kane cupped her face in his hands. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to other people's expectations, trying to be what my father wanted or what society said I should be. But the one thing I know for certain is that I love you, and I'm not going to stand by and let anyone hurt you ever again. So marry me, Elena. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Elena felt like her heart might burst. This man, this wonderful, stubborn, brave man, was willing to risk everything for her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Kane's smile was like sunrise. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and for a moment, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. But reality crashed back quickly. "How are we going to do this?" Elena asked. "Detective Marsh is watching for me, and even if we find someone to marry us, he could stop the ceremony or have us arrested. Leave that to me." Kane released her reluctantly. "Stay here and stay hidden. I'm going to talk to some people." He left, and Elena spent the next hours in an agony of suspense. Miss Olivia tried to distract her with conversation, but Elena couldn't focus on anything except the sound of footsteps and voices outside. When Kane finally returned, he had Mr. Reynolds, the ranch owner, with him, along with the circuit judge who happened to be passing through Sierra Vista. "Miss Sutherland," Judge Harrison said, removing his hat. "Mr. Quincy has explained your situation to me. I want to hear your side of it." Elena told him everything. About Thomas and the abuse, about running away, about Detective Marsh and the warrant. Judge Harrison listened with a grave expression, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is a complicated matter," he said when she finished. "Legally speaking, you are still married to Thomas Montgomery, and he does have certain rights regarding your whereabouts. However, the territory of Arizona has some autonomy in how we interpret and enforce Eastern laws, and I have the authority to grant divorces under certain circumstances." Elena's breath caught. "You can divorce me from Thomas. I can start the process, but it will take time. Months, probably. Your husband would need to be notified and given a chance to contest it." Judge Harrison paused. "However, there is a faster option. If you and Mr. Quincy were to marry now, that would create enough legal confusion to protect you while we sort out the divorce from your first husband. It's not ideal, and there could be challenges, but it would make it much harder for this detective to simply take you back to New York." "We want to get married," Kane said firmly, taking Elena's hand. "Today, if possible." Judge Harrison looked between them. "You understand that this won't be a legal marriage in the strictest sense until the divorce comes through. You would essentially be married in the eyes of this community and under my authority, but if Thomas Montgomery contests it, there could be legal ramifications." "I understand," Elena said, "and I want to do it anyway." "Very well." Judge Harrison opened the book he had brought with him. "We'll do this properly. Mr. Reynolds and Miss Olivia can serve as witnesses." The ceremony was brief and held in the dusty schoolhouse, with late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Elena didn't have a proper dress, and Kane didn't have a ring to offer her, but none of that mattered. When Judge Harrison asked if she took Kane Quincy to be her husband, Elena said, "I do," with her whole heart. And when Kane promised to love and cherish her for as long as they both lived, she believed him. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Quincy, you may kiss your bride." Kane kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious. Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy. "Now," Judge Harrison said, closing his book, "about Detective Marsh. I'll pay him a visit and inform him that the situation has changed. He won't be happy, but there's not much he can do without risking arrest himself for attempting to interfere in a territorial marriage. I'll also begin the process of officially divorcing you from Thomas Montgomery on the grounds of cruelty and abandonment. It will help if you can provide written testimony about his abuse." "I can do that," Elena said, though the thought made her stomach turn. "Good. In the meantime, I suggest you and your new husband keep a low profile until Detective Marsh leaves town." Judge Harrison put on his hat. "Congratulations to you both. I hope you'll be very happy together." After the judge and Mr. Reynolds left, Elena found herself alone with Kane in the schoolhouse, suddenly awkward. They were married now, but they barely knew each other, and the circumstances were so strange. "I know this isn't how you imagine getting married," Kane said softly. "And I know we've got a lot to figure out, but I meant every word I said, Elena. I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. I know you will." Elena took his hands, marveling at how natural it felt. "Kane, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was before Thomas. He changed me, broke things inside me that I'm not sure will ever fully heal. I'm going to have bad days where I'm scared for no reason, where I can't stand to be touched, where I wake up screaming from nightmares. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to give you everything a wife should give her husband. Elena." Kane waited until she looked at him. "I don't want you to be anyone except who you are right now. Bad days, nightmares, scars, and all, we'll figure it out together. And as for the physical side of marriage, we'll take that at whatever pace you need. No pressure, no expectations, just us learning to be together." The relief was overwhelming. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Now we need to figure out where we're going to live. I've been staying in the bunkhouse at the Double R, but that's not suitable for a married couple, and Mrs. Patterson's boarding house doesn't allow men in the rooms." "I have some money saved," Elena offered. "Maybe we could rent a small house. Actually, Mr. Reynolds made me an offer before we came here. There's a foreman's cottage on the ranch that's been sitting empty. He said if I got married, my wife and I could live there rent-free in exchange for me taking on more responsibility at the ranch. I didn't think I'd be taking him up on it so soon, but—" Kane smiled. "It's small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it's sturdy and private. What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect." They left the schoolhouse as the sun was setting, Kane keeping Elena close as they walked. Detective Marsh was nowhere to be seen, and Elena learned later that Judge Harrison had indeed visited the man and strongly suggested he leave Sierra Vista immediately, unless he wanted to face charges himself. The detective left on the next morning's stage, furious but defeated. Elena knew he would report back to Thomas, knew her first husband wouldn't give up easily, but for now she was safe. The foreman's cottage at the Double R Ranch was exactly as Kane had described, small but sturdy, with whitewashed walls and a porch that looked out over the rangeland. Mrs. Reynolds had already stocked the kitchen with basic supplies and left a quilt on the bed as a wedding present. That first night as husband and wife, Kane and Elena sat on the porch steps and watched the stars come out. Kane didn't push for anything more than holding her hand, giving her space to adjust to this new reality. "I never thought I'd be married again," Elena said quietly. "I never thought I'd want to be. Changed your mind. Being married to you is nothing like being married to Thomas. With him, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. With you, I feel—" Elena searched for the words, "safe, like I can breathe." Kane squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I ever want you to feel." They sat in comfortable silence until the night air grew cool, then went inside. Kane made up a bed for himself on the small sofa in the front room without being asked, understanding that Elena needed time before she could share a bed with him. The next weeks were an adjustment for both of them. Elena continued working at the general store while Kane put in long days at the ranch. They learned to live together, to navigate the small domestic routines of married life. Kane proved to be surprisingly handy around the cottage, fixing the door that stuck and repairing the leaky pump. Elena cooked simple meals and kept the place clean, slowly making it feel like a home, but the shadow of Thomas Montgomery hung over everything. Elena wrote out her testimony about his abuse for Judge Harrison, reliving every terrible moment in painful detail. The judge filed the divorce petition, but the legal process was slow, and Thomas sent angry letters contesting everything. He claimed Elena had been a disobedient wife who deserved correction, that she had stolen from him, that she had abandoned her sacred vows. Reading his words made Elena feel sick, but Kane was always there, reminding her that Thomas's version of events was a lie, that she had done nothing wrong. 3 months after their wedding, as autumn began to cool the desert air, Elena received a letter that made her blood run cold. It was from her mother in New York. "Dearest Elena," it read, "your father and I have been frantic with worry since you disappeared. Thomas came to us and said you had run off in a fit of hysteria, possibly ill in your mind. He showed us papers from doctors suggesting you needed treatment in an asylum. We have been praying for your safe return. Please, if you receive this letter, let us know where you are. We love you and only want to help you get the care you need." Elena's hands shook so badly she dropped the letter. Kane picked it up and read it, his expression darkening. "He's trying to have you declared insane," Kane said. "That's his strategy. If he can convince people you're mentally ill, he can have you committed to an asylum and no one would question what happened to you after that." Terror clawed at Elena's throat. "My parents believe him. They think I'm crazy. Then we write to them and tell them the truth. We explain what really happened and why you left." Kane pulled Elena into his arms. "He doesn't get to control your story anymore, Elena. You do." Elena wrote a letter to her parents that night, pouring out everything she had hidden from them during her marriage. She told them about Thomas's violence, about his control, about the fear that had governed every moment of her life with him. She told them about Kane and the new life she was building in Arizona, about the divorce proceedings and her hope for the future. She didn't know if they would believe her. Thomas could be very convincing, and society tended to side with husbands over wives. But she sent the letter anyway, claiming her truth. The response came 6 weeks later. Her mother wrote back with tears evident in the ink-smudged words. "My dearest girl, I am horrified by what you endured. Your father and I had no idea. Thomas seemed like such a respectable man, and we never suspected. Please forgive us for not seeing what was happening. We want only your happiness and safety. If this man Kane truly loves you and treats you well, then you have our blessing. We will write to the judge supporting your divorce petition and refuting Thomas's claims about your mental state." Elena sobbed when she read the letter, overwhelmed with relief. Her parents believed her. They supported her. She wasn't alone. With her parents' testimony added to the petition, the divorce proceedings moved forward more quickly. Thomas continued to contest it, but without the support of Elena's family, and faced with mounting evidence of his cruelty, his legal position weakened. Meanwhile, Elena's marriage to Kane deepened in ways she hadn't expected. They grew comfortable with each other, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Kane never pressured her for physical intimacy, content to hold her when she needed comfort and give her space when she needed solitude. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire in their small cottage, Elena found herself studying Kane's profile in the flickering light. He was reading a book, his expression peaceful, completely unaware of her scrutiny. Love for him welled up in her chest, so strong it almost hurt. "Kane," she said softly. He looked up, smiling. "Yes, I love you." The words felt new and strange and wonderful. "I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you so much." Kane's smile widened into something brilliant. He set aside his book and crossed to where Elena sat, kneeling in front of her chair. "Say it again." "I love you, Kane Quincy. I love your kindness and your patience. I love how you make me laugh and how you never make me feel weak for being scared. I love that you gave me time to heal and never demanded more than I could give." Elena touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "You said you'd love every part of my story, even the broken parts. But you've shown me that I'm not broken, just healing. And I'm ready to write a new story with you." Kane caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Does this mean—" "Yes." Elena felt her cheeks heat, but she didn't look away. "If you're willing to be patient with me, if you understand it might take time for me to be comfortable with everything, then yes. I want to be your wife in every sense." "We'll take it slow," Kane promised. "As slow as you need." That night, they moved from separate sleeping arrangements to sharing the small bedroom. Kane was infinitely patient, letting Elena set the pace, always checking that she was comfortable, that she wasn't afraid. It was nothing like her experiences with Thomas, which had been brutal and degrading. With Kane, it was gentle and loving, an expression of the bond growing between them rather than an exercise in domination and control. Afterward, lying in Kane's arms with her head on his chest, Elena felt something she had never expected to feel again: whole. The scars from her past were still there, would probably always be there in some form, but they no longer defined her. She was more than what Thomas had done to her, more than the fear and pain. She was Elena Quincy now, wife to a good man, building a life based on love and respect. As winter settled over Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Elena's life continued to unfold in ways that felt like a gift. The divorce from Thomas Montgomery was finally granted in February of 1879, with Judge Harrison ruling that Thomas's cruelty and abuse constituted grounds for dissolution of the marriage. Thomas tried to appeal, but without support from Elena's family, and faced with the testimony of several people who had witnessed his violent temper, his appeal was denied. Elena was free. Truly, legally free. She and Kane celebrated by having their marriage blessed in the small Sierra Vista church, with Mrs. Patterson and Miss Olivia and the entire Reynolds family in attendance. Elena wore a simple dress that Mrs. Reynolds had helped her sew, and Kane wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. "Do you, Elena, take this man Kane to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish from this day forward?" the preacher asked. "I do," Elena said, louder and more certain than she had been the first time. This marriage was her choice, made freely and with full knowledge of what it meant. Kane slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, the ring he had been saving for since their hurried first ceremony. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing. Elena even danced with Kane, letting him spin her around the church hall while she laughed, dizzy with happiness. Life on the Double R Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kane was promoted to foreman, with increased responsibilities and better pay. Elena continued working at the general store part-time, enjoying the work and the friendships she had built in town. She and Martha Hutchins became close, and Elena often helped with the Hutchins children, discovering a maternal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. In the summer of 1879, Elena realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a complicated rush of emotions. Joy, certainly, and excitement at the thought of a child with Kane. But also fear, because her only model for marriage and family had been Thomas, and some dark part of her worried she might somehow repeat the pattern she had learned. Kane found her crying on the porch steps one evening, and she confessed everything. "What if I'm a terrible mother?" Elena asked through her tears. "What if I don't know how to do this right? What if our child grows up damaged because of what happened to me?" Kane sat beside her and pulled her close. "Elena, you are going to be an amazing mother. I've seen how you are with the Hutchins children, how patient and kind you are. And our child is going to grow up knowing love and safety because we're going to give them what we didn't have. We're going to break the cycle together. You really believe that, with every part of me." Kane placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This baby is going to have the best mother in the world, and I'm going to do everything I can to be a good father. We're going to figure it out as we go, and we're going to make mistakes, but we'll do it together. That's what matters." Elena leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. Maybe he was right. Maybe the scars she carried didn't have to define her future or her child's future. Maybe love really could heal even the deepest wounds. Their son was born in March of 1880, during a spring rainstorm that turned the desert briefly green. The labor was long and difficult, but when Elena finally held her baby boy in her arms, every moment of pain became worthwhile. "He's perfect," Kane said, his voice full of wonder as he gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "What should we name him?" Elena looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, at the way his little mouth moved as he tried to figure out this new world. "James," she said, "after your mother." "James Quincy." Kane's eyes filled with tears. "My mother would have loved that. She would have loved you." Little James proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely fussed and seemed to find the world endlessly fascinating. Elena discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared, and Kane was completely devoted to his son, often taking him on walks around the ranch even when James was too young to appreciate it. The years that followed were the happiest of Elena's life. Kane worked hard at the ranch and was eventually offered a partnership by Mr. Reynolds, who was ready to start stepping back from daily operations. Elena helped manage the financial side of the ranch business, her skills with numbers proving invaluable. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose in 1882 and another son named William in 1884. The little cottage became too small for their growing family, so Kane and several of the ranch hands built a larger house on a piece of land, Mr. Reynolds sold them at a generous price. Sierra Vista grew and changed around them, adding new businesses and attracting more settlers. But the core of the community remained the same. People who had come west looking for second chances and who supported each other through droughts and harsh winters and the ordinary struggles of frontier life. Elena never completely forgot Thomas Montgomery or the scars he had left on her soul. She still had occasional nightmares, still flinched at sudden loud noises, still carried a wariness that would probably never fully disappear. But those moments became rarer as the years passed, overshadowed by the life she had built with Kane. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kane took Elena on a picnic to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. The children were spending the day with Mrs. Reynolds, giving Kane and Elena a rare afternoon alone. "You remember that first night at the church social?" Kane asked, lying on the blanket with his head in Elena's lap. "When you told me you didn't dance, I remember. I was so scared of you, of everyone. I thought if anyone looked too closely, they'd see how broken I was and they'd send me away. And now—" Elena thought about it, looking out over the desert landscape that had become home, listening to the peaceful sound of the creek. "Now I see that I was never broken, just hurt. And hurt heals when you give it time and care and love." She smiled down at Kane. "You taught me that. You loved every part of my story, even the parts I wanted to hide, and you showed me that my past doesn't have to define my future." "You did the hard work of healing yourself," Kane said. "I just had the privilege of being there while you did it." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and laughing and simply being together. When they finally headed home, Elena felt a deep sense of contentment. Her life hadn't turned out anything like she had once imagined. It had been harder, more painful, more complicated. But it had also been fuller and richer, and more real than any fairy tale. The years continued to pass in a blur of ranching and child-rearing, and the slow accumulation of memories that make up a life. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved animals and spent hours helping his father with the horses. Rose was fierce and independent, reminding Elena of the person she herself had become. William was the comedian of the family, always making everyone laugh with his antics. Elena stayed in touch with her parents through letters, and when James was 6, they made the long journey from New York to visit. It was a bittersweet reunion, full of tears and apologies and the gradual rebuilding of trust. Elena's father and Kane got along well, bonding over their shared love of hard work and their devotion to family. Before her parents left to return to New York, Elena's mother took her aside. "I'm so proud of the life you've built here," she said. "And I'm sorry we didn't see what was happening with Thomas, that we didn't protect you." "You didn't know," Elena assured her. "Thomas was very good at hiding what he really was, and I was good at pretending everything was fine. Still, we should have looked closer, should have questioned more." Her mother squeezed Elena's hand. "But you survived, and more than that, you thrived. This man Kane, he's a good one." "He's the best one," Elena agreed. "He gave me back my life." In 1890, when Elena was 34 and Kane was 36, Mr. Reynolds decided to fully retire, selling them the Double R Ranch at a price they could manage with years of payments. It was a responsibility and a gift, the culmination of everything Kane had worked for since arriving in Arizona as a young man looking for purpose. The night they signed the papers, making them official ranch owners, Kane and Elena stood on the porch of their house and looked out over the land that was now truly theirs. "Did you ever imagine this?" Elena asked. "When you were working in that bank in Missouri, hating every minute, did you imagine you'd end up here?" "Never, not even in my wildest dreams." Kane pulled Elena close. But I'm glad this is where I ended up. This land, this life, you and the kids. It's more than I ever thought I deserved. You deserve all of it and more." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "Kane, I need you to know something. When I stepped off that stagecoach 16 years ago, I was running from my past. I was broken and scared, and I didn't believe I deserved anything good. But you saw past all of that. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. And you loved me anyway, scars and all." "Loving you was the easiest thing I've ever done," Kane said simply. "And watching you heal, watching you become the strong, confident woman you are now, that's been the greatest privilege of my life." They kissed as the sun set over their ranch. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built something beautiful out of broken pieces. The children grew up strong and capable, each finding their own path. James took over more of the ranch operations as he got older, showing a natural talent for managing cattle and horses. Rose shocked everyone by announcing at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher like Miss Olivia, and she eventually did just that, running the schoolhouse in Sierra Vista and later helping to establish schools in other growing towns. William, true to his personality, became a horse trader and showman, traveling the territory and sending home letters full of wild stories and unlikely adventures. Elena and Kane grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming weathered from decades of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were 8 grandchildren by then, with another on the way, and the house was full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family. That evening, after everyone had eaten and the children were playing in the yard, Kane pulled Elena aside. "Walk with me." They walked to their favorite spot by the creek, moving slower than they once had but still comfortable together. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. 30 years, Elena marveled. It doesn't seem possible. Best 30 years of my life. Kane sat on the bank of the creek, and Elena settled beside him. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If you hadn't gotten on that stagecoach to Arizona, if I hadn't been in town that day, if we hadn't taken a chance on each other? Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on what might have been. This is what is, and it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Elena leaned her head on Kane's shoulder. You kept your promise, you know. That day you told me you'd love every part of my story. You've done exactly that. It was an easy promise to keep. Your story is beautiful, Elena. All of it, even the hard parts, because it made you who you are, and who you are is extraordinary. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, holding hands and watching the water flow by. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, could see the lights of their house glowing warm against the night. Elena thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Sierra Vista so many years ago, carrying scars no one could see and believing she would never be whole again. She thought about the cowboy who had seen those scars and loved her anyway, who had given her the time and space to heal at her own pace. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For loving me. For believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself." Kane turned to look at her, his eyes still as blue as they had been 3 decades earlier. "Elena Quincy, you saved yourself. I just had the good sense to fall in love with you while you did it." They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin their family, ready for whatever years remained to them. The scars were still there, would always be there in some form, but they were no longer the defining feature of Elena's story. Instead, they were simply part of the tapestry of a life fully lived, a testament to survival and healing and the transformative power of love. As Elena stepped into the warm light of her home, surrounded by the children and grandchildren she never thought she'd have, married to the man who had shown her what love was supposed to be, she felt a deep and abiding gratitude. Her story hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Every painful step, every moment of fear, every hard-won victory had led her here, to this life, to this love. And that, she thought as Kane squeezed her hand and smiled at her across the crowded room, was more than enough. The years after their 30th anniversary passed with the comfortable rhythm of a life well lived. Kane continued to manage the ranch with James's increasing help, while Elena kept the books and managed the household with the efficiency she had first displayed at Hutchins' General Store so many years ago. In 1895, tragedy struck when a winter storm hit harder than anyone expected. Several cattle were lost, and one of the newer ranch hands, a young man named Peter, was caught out in the blizzard and nearly died from exposure. Elena and Kane took him into their home and nursed him back to health over several weeks, and the experience reminded them both of how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. "We should write things down," Elena said one evening as they sat by the fire, Peter finally recovered and back in the bunkhouse. "Our story, I mean, so the children and grandchildren know where they came from, what we survived to build this life. You want to write about Thomas?" Kane asked carefully. Even after all these years, he was protective of her feelings about her first husband. "I do. Not for him, but for me, and for any of our descendants who might face their own struggles someday. I want them to know that you can survive terrible things, that you can heal and build something beautiful even when you think you're too broken to go on." Elena took Kane's hand. "I want them to know about the cowboy who loved every part of my story." So Elena began to write, filling journals with her memories of arriving in Sierra Vista, of meeting Kane, of the long journey from fear to trust to love. She wrote about Thomas, too, though those pages were harder, each word a small exorcism of pain long past. Kane read what she wrote and added his own perspective, his memories of falling in love with a woman who flinched from kindness because she had learned to expect cruelty. The journals became a family treasure, passed down through generations along with the ranch itself. In the margins of those pages, descendants would later add their own notes, their own stories of survival and love, creating a legacy that extended far beyond Elena and Kane themselves. In 1898, Elena received word that Thomas Montgomery had died in New York, killed in a street accident involving a runaway carriage. She felt nothing when she read the news, no relief or satisfaction or sadness. Thomas had stopped being real to her long ago, becoming instead a cautionary tale, a reminder of the life she had escaped. "Does it feel strange?" Kane asked when she told him. "Knowing he's gone?" "No. He's been gone from my life for so long that this just makes it official." Elena folded the letter and set it aside. "I'm grateful I survived him, grateful I got away, but I don't have any energy left to spend on hating him or wishing things had been different. I'm just glad it's truly over." That night, Elena burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. It felt symbolic, a final severing of ties to a past that no longer had any power over her present. The turn of the century brought changes to Arizona and to Sierra Vista. Statehood was being discussed seriously now, and the railroad had finally reached their corner of the territory, bringing easier access to markets and supplies, but also changing the character of the isolated frontier town Elena had first known. But the Quincy Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and tradition in a changing world. Kane and Elena became the patriarch and matriarch of not just their own family, but of the wider community. The couple everyone pointed to as an example of what a good marriage looked like. Young couples would sometimes come to them for advice, and Elena always gave the same counsel. Love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling. Choose to see the best in each other. Choose to communicate even when it's hard. Choose to forgive and to grow together. And never, ever accept cruelty in the name of love. Real love builds you up, never tears you down. In 1905, when Elena was 49 and Kane was 51, they decided to make a trip back east for the first time since Elena had fled New York so many years ago. Their children were grown and capable of managing the ranch, and both Elena and Kane felt a pull to see where they had come from, to show each other the places that had shaped them before they found each other. New York had changed dramatically in the nearly 3 decades since Elena had left. The city was bigger, louder, more crowded than she remembered. Her father had passed away several years earlier, but her mother was still alive, now in her 70s and living with Elena's youngest sister. The reunion was emotional, full of tears and laughter and the bittersweet recognition of how much time had passed. Elena's mother held her hands and studied her face, seeing the lines and gray hair and the confidence that had replaced the fear. "You're happy," her mother said. It wasn't a question. "I am, truly happy." Elena glanced at Kane, who was politely chatting with her sister and her sister's husband. "He's a good man, Mama, the best man I've ever known. I can see that. The way he looks at you, the way you look at him. That's what I always wanted for you, sweetheart. That's what love is supposed to be." They spent 2 weeks in New York before heading to Missouri to visit Kane's hometown. Kane's father had died years ago, never having reconciled with his son's choice to become a rancher instead of a banker. But Kane had a younger brother who had taken over the bank, and they visited him and his family. The reunion was cordial but distant. Kane's brother clearly didn't understand why Kane had chosen such a hard life, couldn't fathom giving up civilization for the rough frontier. But Kane didn't seem bothered by the disconnect. "I made the right choice," he told Elena as they boarded the train to return to Arizona. "That life was never for me. My real life, my real family is waiting for us back home." Home. The word resonated in Elena's chest. Arizona was home now, had been for longer than New York ever was. The ranch, the desert, the mountains in the distance, the community that had embraced her. That was where she belonged. When they returned to Sierra Vista, their children and grandchildren met them at the station with hugs and excited questions about their travels. As Elena looked at the faces surrounding her, 3 generations of family that existed because she had been brave enough to run and Kane had been brave enough to love her, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The next decade passed peacefully. Elena and Kane gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to James and his wife, though they remained active and involved. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, delighting in the babies and toddlers who brought new energy to family gatherings. Elena continued to write in her journals, documenting not just the past but the present, wanting to capture the fullness of the life she had built. She wrote about the ordinary moments that made up a marriage, the quiet evenings spent reading together, the disagreements that were resolved with communication rather than violence, the way Kane still held her hand after 40 years together. In 1916, when Elena was 60 and Kane was 62, they celebrated their 40th anniversary with a party that seemed to include half of Sierra Vista. The town had grown substantially, now officially a city with paved streets and electric lights, but the core community remained close-knit. At the party, James stood up to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. They taught us what love looks like, not through grand gestures, but through 40 years of choosing each other every single day. They taught us that strength isn't about never falling down, but about getting back up and building something beautiful from the broken pieces. They taught us that family is everything, and that home is wherever the people you love are. To Elena and Kane Quincy, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. The crowd cheered and clinked glasses, and Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks. She looked at Kane, who was also emotional, and squeezed his hand. 40 years, she said softly. Who would have thought? I would have, Kane replied. From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, I knew you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how thoroughly. They danced that night, slowly and carefully, their bodies not as flexible as they once were, but their hearts just as full. Around them, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren danced too, a living testament to the love Elena and Kane had built. As the years advanced into Elena's 60s and Kane's 70s, age began to take its toll. Kane developed arthritis in his hands, making the physical work of ranching difficult. Elena's eyesight weakened, forcing her to use spectacles for her beloved reading and writing. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute, new rhythms for this stage of life. They spent more time on the porch of their house, watching sunsets and telling stories to whichever grandchildren or great-grandchildren happened to be visiting. Elena would tell about the early days in Sierra Vista, about Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and working at the general store. Kane would tell about learning to break horses, and the time he nearly got trampled by a stubborn bull. And sometimes, when they were alone, they would talk about those first difficult months when Elena was learning to trust again, and Kane was learning how to love someone who carried invisible scars. Do you remember, Elena asked one evening, that night by the creek when you first told me you'd love every part of my story? I remember every word of that conversation. Kane smiled. You told me you didn't know if you'd ever be able to love anyone again. And you said you'd be patient, that you'd give me time. Elena reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become second nature over 4 decades. You kept that promise, Kane. You've kept every promise you ever made to me. It was easy. You were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything. Kane raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, Elena Quincy. Even when I was difficult. Even when I woke you up with nightmares or flinched away from your touch or couldn't explain why I was crying. Especially then. Because those moments were when you needed me most, when you were trusting me with your vulnerabilities. And every time you let me in a little more, every time you chose to trust me despite your fear, it felt like a gift. Elena felt the familiar burn of tears but didn't try to hide them. After 40 years with Kane, she had learned that tears weren't weakness, just another language for expressing emotion. I don't tell you enough how grateful I am that you were the one standing on that dusty street the day I arrived. If it had been anyone else, if I had met someone who didn't have your patience or your kindness, I don't know what would have happened to me. I think you would have been fine. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Elena. You always have been. I just had the privilege of being there while you discovered that strength for yourself. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, cattle lowing, horses neighing, the voices of ranch hands calling to each other. This is a good life we've built, Elena said softly. A really good life. The best, Kane agreed. In 1920, Elena was 64 and Kane was 66 when Kane suffered a heart attack while working with the horses. He survived, but the doctor warned that he needed to take it easier to avoid strenuous work and stress. The heart attack frightened Elena more than she wanted to admit. The thought of losing Kane, of facing life without him, was almost unbearable. They had been together for so long, had become so intertwined that she couldn't imagine herself without him. But Kane recovered, albeit with new limitations. He could no longer ride or do heavy physical work, which frustrated him but which he accepted with the same practical grace he brought to everything. Instead, he focused on teaching the younger generation, sharing decades of accumulated knowledge about ranching and horses and life in the desert. Elena took over more of the record-keeping and administrative work of the ranch, her mind still sharp even as her body aged. She hired a young woman to help with the more physically demanding household tasks, remembering how kind Mrs. Patterson and others had been to her when she first arrived in Sierra Vista all those years ago. The 1920s brought yet more changes to Arizona. The state had achieved statehood in 1912, and now the modern world was creeping in with automobiles and telephones and radios. James bought a truck for the ranch, much to Kane's bewilderment and secret delight. But through all the changes, the core of the Quincy family remained constant. The love between Elena and Kane, the commitment to family, the values of hard work and integrity they had instilled in their children and grandchildren. In 1924, Elena and Kane celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The party was smaller than their 40th had been, as some of their older friends had passed away, but it was no less joyful. All three of their children were there, along with their spouses, 14 grandchildren and 23 great-grandchildren. 50 years, Rose said when she gave a toast. Most people don't get 50 years with the person they love. My parents have been blessed with 50 years of partnership, of love, of choosing each other every single day. They've shown us what a marriage can be when it's built on respect and kindness and genuine affection. They've shown us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a commitment you make and then keep making, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Elena squeezed Kane's hand under the table, thinking about all the hard times they had weathered together, all the moments when their commitment to each other had been tested and had held firm. That night, lying in bed together, Kane turned to Elena with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something." Elena's heart clenched with automatic fear, though she tried to hide it. "What is it?" "I'm an old man, Elena. My heart isn't what it was, and I know I don't have many years left. And I need you to know that when my time comes, I don't want you to grieve too hard or too long. I want you to celebrate the life we've had together and then keep living. Promise me that." "Kane, don't talk like that." Elena felt panic rising in her chest. "I have to. We both know it's true." Kane cupped her face gently. "Elena, loving you has been the greatest joy and privilege of my life. These 50 years with you have been worth more than 100 years with anyone else. But when I'm gone, I need to know that you'll be all right, that you'll let our children take care of you, and that you'll keep writing your stories and playing with the great-grandchildren. Promise me." Elena's tears flowed freely now. "I promise, but I don't want to think about it." "I know." "Neither do I. But we're getting old, sweetheart, and these conversations need to happen." Kane pulled her close, letting her rest her head on his chest like she had done thousands of times before. "Now let's not waste the time we have left worrying about the end. Let's just enjoy each day we get together." They did exactly that. For the next 3 years, Elena and Kane made the most of every moment. They took walks around the ranch when Kane felt strong enough. They played with their great-grandchildren and dispensed advice to their grandchildren. They sat on their porch and watched sunsets and held hands and simply existed together in comfortable silence. Elena continued her journal writing, documenting these final years with bittersweet clarity. She wrote about Kane's laugh, about the way he still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world even though they were both old and gray. She wrote about the life they had built and the love that had sustained them through everything. In May of 1927, Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. Elena woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. But even through the pain, Elena felt grateful. Grateful for the 53 years they had shared, for the family they had created, for the love that had transformed her life. At the funeral, Elena stood between her children and looked at the crowd gathered to pay their respects. It seemed like all of Sierra Vista had turned out, along with friends from neighboring ranches and towns. Person after person came to tell her stories about how Kane had helped them, how his kindness had made a difference in their lives. He was a good man, they said, over and over. The best man. And Elena nodded through her tears, knowing it was true. Kane Quincy had been the best man she had ever known, and she had been blessed beyond measure to share her life with him. After the funeral, Elena returned to the house she and Kane had built together and felt his absence like a missing limb. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. She kept living. She continued to work on the ranch as much as her body would allow, though James and his son Robert did most of the actual management now. She continued to write in her journals, though now the entries were tinged with missing Kane. She continued to participate in family gatherings, holding great-great-grandchildren on her lap and telling them stories about their great-grandfather. "Tell us about how you met Grandpa Kane," they would beg. And Elena would smile through the ache in her heart and tell them about stepping off a stagecoach onto a dusty street and meeting a cowboy with kind eyes who had seen her scars and loved her anyway. The years after Kane's death were quieter, slower. Elena moved with the seasons, taking comfort in the rhythms of ranch life that had structured her existence for more than 5 decades. She attended church every Sunday, sat in the same pew she and Kane had shared for years, and found peace in the familiar rituals. On what would have been their 60th wedding anniversary, Elena returned to the spot by the creek where Kane had first told her he loved her. She sat on the bank, listening to the water flow over the rocks and talked to him as if he were still there. "We did it," she said softly. "We built something beautiful, Kane. Look at our family, at all the lives that exist because you saw past my fears and loved me anyway. Look at the legacy we've left. 3 children, 14 grandchildren, 37 great-grandchildren, and counting. All of them carrying pieces of us forward into the future." The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees, and Elena smiled, imagining it was Kane's response. "I miss you every day," she continued. "But I'm not afraid anymore. You taught me how to be strong, how to trust, how to love. And when my time comes to join you, I'll go knowing that I lived a full life, that I survived what tried to break me and built something beautiful from the pieces. Just like you always said I would." She sat by the creek until the sun began to set, then walked slowly back to the house. Her body was old and tired, but her heart was at peace. Elena Sutherland Quincy passed away peacefully in her sleep in October of 1932 at the age of 76. She died in the house she and Kane had built, surrounded by the family they had created, her journals stacked neatly on the bedside table. At her funeral, the church was packed with 5 generations of family and friends whose lives she had touched. Rose read from one of Elena's journals, the entry from the night after Kane had first told her he loved her. "I don't know if I deserve this kindness, this love," Elena had written, "but Kane says I do, and I'm starting to believe him. He says he'll love every part of my story, even the broken parts. And maybe, just maybe, I can learn to love those parts too. Maybe the scars are just proof that I survived, that I was strong enough to escape and brave enough to start over. Maybe they're not weaknesses after all, but badges of honor for battles fought and won. Rose's voice broke as she read, and several of her siblings and cousins stepped forward to stand with her, hands on her shoulders in support. "My mother taught us that love is patient and kind," Rose said after she finished reading. "She taught us that it's possible to heal from even the deepest wounds, that it's never too late to start over, that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. And she taught us that the right person will love every part of your story, will stand beside you through the healing, will give you the space and time you need to become who you were always meant to be." Elena was buried beside Kane in the small cemetery on the edge of Sierra Vista, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their real memorial was the family they had created, the love they had shared, the example they had set for 5 generations of descendants. Years later, Elena's journals were compiled and published by one of her great-great-granddaughters, becoming a small but cherished book about survival and healing, and the transformative power of love. The book resonated with people across the country, especially women who had survived their own traumas and were seeking hope that healing was possible. On the dedication page, the great-great-granddaughter wrote, "For Elena and Kane, who showed us that love can heal even the deepest scars, and that our past does not have to define our future. May we all find someone who loves every part of our story." The Quincy Ranch remained in the family for generations, a living testament to what Elena and Kane had built. And every summer, the family would gather there for a reunion, dozens and eventually hundreds of descendants coming together to celebrate their shared heritage. At these reunions, the oldest members of the family would tell stories about Elena and Kane, keeping their memory alive. They would tell about Elena's courage in leaving an abusive marriage and traveling across the country to start over. They would tell about Kane's patience and kindness, about how he had given Elena the space to heal at her own pace. They would tell about the love that had sustained them through 50 years of marriage and the legacy they had left behind. And always, someone would read from Elena's journals, her words echoing across the generations. "I came to Sierra Vista with scars no one could see, convinced I was too broken to be loved. But Kane looked at me and said, 'I'll love every part of your story,' and he did. For 50 years, he loved me through the nightmares and the fear, through the healing and the growing, through every high and low. He showed me that love isn't about fixing broken things, but about honoring them, about giving them time and space to heal themselves. He showed me that I was never broken at all, just wounded, and that wounds can heal when they're treated with patience and care and genuine love. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. Not that I survived something terrible, but that I found someone who loved me through the healing, who stood beside me while I put the pieces back together, who celebrated every small victory along the way. That kind of love, the kind that sees you at your worst and chooses to stay, the kind that gives without expecting anything in return, the kind that builds you up instead of tearing you down, that's the kind of love that changes lives. That's the kind of love Kane gave me, and that's the kind of love I hope every person in this family, every person reading these words, finds for themselves someday. The story of Elena and Kane became part of the family mythology, told and retold with each generation. It became a measuring stick for what love should look like, a reminder that the right person will wait for you to heal, will love you through the process, will never use your vulnerabilities against you. And in Sierra Vista, now a thriving small city, A historical marker stands on the site where Hutchins General Store once stood. The marker tells the story of Elena Sutherland Quincy, who arrived in town in 1878 as a refugee from domestic violence and went on to become a pillar of the community, a successful businesswoman, the matriarch of one of the area's founding families, and an inspiration to generations of women seeking to escape abusive situations. But the real memorial to Elena and Kane isn't made of bronze or stone. It's in the love that their descendants carry forward, in the relationships they build based on respect and kindness, in the healing that continues across generations. It's in every person who reads Elena's story and finds the courage to leave a bad situation, or to trust again after betrayal, or to believe that they deserve better than cruelty. Elena came with scars no one could see. Kane said he'd love every part of her story. And together, they built a life that proved love can heal, that second chances are real, and that the right person will see you for who you truly are and cherish you, scars and all. Their story didn't end when they died. It lived on in every child who learned to treat others with kindness, in every couple who chose each other again and again through hard times, in every person who survived something terrible and found the courage to build something beautiful from the pieces. That was the legacy of Elena and Kane Quincy. Not that they lived perfect lives, but that they loved imperfectly but persistently, that they chose each other every day, that they built something lasting from broken beginnings. Their love story became a beacon for everyone who came after, a reminder that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, that love, real love, will always wait for you to be ready. And in the end, isn't that what every great love story is about? Not the absence of scars, but the presence of someone who loves you through the healing. Not perfection, but patience. Not fixing what's broken, but honoring it, caring for it, giving it time to mend itself with gentle support. Elena came with scars. Kane loved her anyway. And together, they proved that sometimes the best love stories are the ones where two broken people heal each other simply by choosing, every single day, to stay.